Hello and welcome to Unprofessional Engineering. My name is James.
And you got Luke.
Luke, another write-in from one of our big-time fans.
How did I not? I thought you didn't tell me this was a customer request.
It is a customer request. The Army Corps of Engineers. We actually mentioned that we wanted to do an episode about this a long time ago.
And we just totally forgot.
Yeah, and our listener was catching up on some old podcasts, and we got on this, and now we're about to figure out what it is they actually do.
Okay. I'm assuming, based on my experience with the legendary G.I. Joe cartoon series that I grew up with, I'm assuming there was a guy, I forget what his name was, and I should have researched this, but he did all kinds of building stuff. I'm assuming that's what the Army Corps of Engineers did.
Kind of, actually.
Yeah.
We'll get into that.
He blew stuff up. And,
Who was
made
your favorite
bridges.
G.I. Joe, Luke?
Scarlet.
Was she?
Yeah.
Who was the ninja?
I forget. The guy that had the
There
dog.
was the black one and the white one.
Yeah, I forget.
I always like Sergeant Slaughter. Because why wouldn't I?
Sergeant Slaughter.
All right.
All right.
Moving on. Straight from the camel's hump.
Yep.
Which is like the horse's mouth, but different. Our listener, David W., is an active duty Army captain currently assigned to the Army Corps of Engineers.
Thank you for your service.
So this is what he wrote, and it's a pretty solid summary for
Okay.
us. So as far as the Army Corps of Engineers goes, it's made up of both civilian, government employees, and Army soldiers, which I did not know.
I didn't know that
The
either.
Corps falls under the Department of Defense, good old DoD, and the Department of the Army for administration. The Corps has two major departments under it, the Engineer Regiment and the Corps of Engineers. The Engineer Regiment is the all-soldier branch
Okay.
of the Corps, which is responsible for supporting the Army and the Department of Defense in military operations. So like temporary, like the guy you're talking about, your
Yep.
G.I. Joe guy.
Yep.
Building bridges, things like that, combat operations. The Corps of Engineers is what most non-military people like us are familiar with, and it's led by uniformed military officers, but mostly staffed, like 98% mostly staffed, by civilian government employees. The role of the Corps is to support the nation by providing and maintaining large civil works projects like flood control and freedom of navigation support for federal waterways, which is a big thing that we'll talk about later on. The Corps also supports large military construction projects like permanent facilities, runways, hospitals, roads, bridges, so on. The role of the Corps is more in the project management and contract administration realm at this point, using funding to secure contractors like maybe Bechtel or someone like that to complete the construction. As having served in both, David says, the Engineer Regiment and the Corps of Engineers, it's been pretty fun. It's been a pretty fun opportunity as an engineer, even though he's a mechanical engineer,
Nice.
represent, and all of this stuff is dirt and structures stuff, which is boring.
Okay.
Stupid civils. So that's what it comes down to
So,
from an Army captain.
I feel like we could just end the show because you
pretty much nailed it.
You literally said everything that I was going to say. So let's dive a little deeper, as they say, James.
Wow, is that what they say?
I'm pretty sure that's what they say.
Okay, do you want to start diving deeper?
Yeah, so
Can
the
I give you one fun fact first?
I love when we start with
I
fun
know.
facts. Shoot.
The USACE, or the United States Army Corps of Engineers, is made up of 37,000 civilian and military personnel.
You're the worst.
Pretty good, right?
You literally just stole my thunder.
Did I really?
Well, no, hold on. I'm going to say it before you do. It's the world's largest public engineering design and construction management agency in the world.
It is. That's
You literally
impressive.
stole exactly my first line. I hate you sometimes.
I'm sorry. Do you have more you wanted to dive deeper
You said
in?
37,000, right?
I did.
Did you see the break? Did you? I couldn't find the breakdown of
Civilian
versus enlisted
I didn't look.
and officers. Okay.
I feel like everyday listener doesn't need those kind of figures.
Okay. An interesting fact, like this is my ignorance, which I don't have much of,
No.
but, it's every now and then.
Right.
I just assumed that it's called the Army Corps of Engineers. Like, I never knew that you could be a civilian. Like, if you go...
Yeah.
Like, if you go on their website and, you pick on job opportunities, not that I'm looking,
Right,
but you pick on job opportunities, like you and I don't think they have too many marketing opportunities. It'd be cool if they did, though. like they have like just like all these really cool just general engineering jobs. Like you could just go work for the Army Corps of Engineers. I just assume you had to be like like enlisted, or you had to be an officer to be in it.
See, as I'm not ignorant, I actually knew that you didn't have to be in the Army to do it. Only because I went to college with a kid that interned there, and his dad worked there, so he was going to get him a job, and I was all jealous because I had to find a job on my own.
Okay.
So, that's how that is. I wanted to talk about history. How about you?
Yep, I got some.
You do?
Yep.
Do you want me to start, or do you want to?
Well, since you stole my thunder, I think I'll start.
Okay, go for it.
So George Washington, Washington, as we say here in the Burgh, George Washington appointed the first engineering officer of the Army on June 16th, 1775, during the American Revolution. This cat's name was Richard Grindley. He became George Washington's first chief. Gridley. He became his first chief engineer, and basically, they needed stuff built, right? They needed fortifications. They needed bridges. Because they were fighting the redcoats, the bad guys.
That's why.
Right. So what you had was a whole bunch of untrained people thinking, oh, I'll build this wall, and then they kind of dig this hole, and then it collapses and everybody dies. And I think what they realized was, hey, we need someone with an engineering background to build our fortifications, build some of the facilities that maybe we live in, potentially build roads and bridges to get the troops moved in a more efficient way. And it was the first time that ever happened in the United States with good old Georgie Wash.
Yeah, pretty cool, right? It wasn't until 1779, though, that Congress actually created a separate Corps of Engineers. The Army engineers, including a bunch of French officers, so we had some Frenchy help, which, I mean, they probably didn't do much, were instrumental in some of the hard-fought battles. They were instrumental in some of the hard-fought battles of the Revolutionary War, including Bunker Hill and the final victory at Yorktown. So I say that it's pretty safe to say that engineers pretty much created the United States single-handedly.
I mean, if you look if you look at the projects they do, and you look at how it started, and all the, I mean,
we won the Bunker Hill and Yorktown. We won
the engineers,
the war, the engineers,
MEs,
mechanical engineers,
not the civils, not the triple E's.
Stupid engineers.
Sorry.
Okay. More.
Yeah, go, shoot.
Oh, I thought maybe you.
Oh no, I got some. No, one that's interesting, and I've driven on this a ton of times, and I never realized it. But another thing that they were responsible for is just some general history facts. The construction,
all of the things they built,
the construction of the national road. So some guy by the name of John McAdam.
John McAdam.
Yeah,
it just sounds made up.
Yeah. So these guys built the Army Corps of Engineers built the National Road, which is from Cumberland, Maryland, and brings you all the way up into
the Cumberland Gap.
Yeah, up Appalachia, and however you say it.
Carson City.
I've driven on the National Road before, and I never realized the Army Corps of Engineers designed and built that.
It's very cool. In 1794, did you know Congress organized the Corps of Artillerists and Engineers? But it wasn't until 1802 that they established a separate corps, continuing to this day. Fun fact about that. Are you ready for this?
Shoot.
West Point showed up in 1802 as well. And until 1866, the superintendent of the academy was always an engineer officer.
I love it.
Fun fact number 2.
Shoot.
During the first half of the 19th century, West Point was the major and for a while the only engineering school in the country. I did not know that.
Yeah.
West Point, an engineering school.
That's pretty cool.
The only engineering school.
You know how all the football players be like the West Point
engineering school. None of them are engineers.
Brownsville, Pennsylvania. Captain Richard Danfield. He was a future chief engineer, or basically that's the cat that's leading the Corps at the time. He built the first bridge in the United States with a cast iron superstructure.
What?
It's an 80-foot span that remains in use till today in Brownsville. I've driven across that.
Where's Brownsville?
See,
now I'm questioning if you've ever actually driven across it.
No, I've been to Brownsville, and I drove across a really big bridge, and I'm assuming was the one I drove across.
Okay, go ahead. Continue while I look this up. Brownsville, PA.
Well, the fact that you doubt me.
I don't doubt you. I just want to know where it's actually located. Is that so wrong?
I think it's relatively close.
Oh, it's on the Mon.
Yeah, it's close.
Oh.
I told you.
Well, I didn't
Why
know
do
it
you
was
think
like next door. It's
Why-
like down in Washington
Yeah.
almost.
You think I'm a liar?
Well, I do think you're a liar. Oh, it's by California. Okay,
Yeah,
I've
California,
probably,
PA.
I've probably covered or driven across this as
Yeah.
well. Very good. Okay, in 1824.
Shoot.
Well, you know what? Before we get into 1824, which was a great year for the Army Corps of Engineers, let's take a break for a word from our sponsor.
I'm assuming the Army Corps of Engineers or the U.S. Army sponsoring us.
The U.S. Army and the Corps combined together to pony up $0 for this episode.
Yeah, but you know what? That's all right. They do pretty good stuff.
They do pretty good stuff.
I'll take
that's
it.
right. We're going to give a shout out, though, to a few people.
Okay.
David W., he is our part of the Army Corps of Engineers who wrote in and made this happen. So thank you for that.
Yep. Thank you very much.
We also have Derek K., who wrote us a review and subscribes. Woo.
Did you send him stickers
I'm
yet?
getting him stickers for his CNC mill and toolbox.
Okay.
But I've run out of stamps.
Okay.
So,
We could give him the new ones that we just got.
oh, maybe
We're
we'll
gonna be
hold off.
debuting those at AU.
Oh, that'll be good. Yeah, that'll be
That's
good.
sweet.
In Vegas this
Yeah.
year in a couple weeks. All
Yep.
right. Shout out to some old friends that wrote in as well. Andrew P., James K., Jason P., Adam from CAD Noobs, and even Steve F., who is back with us
Oh.
and was none too happy that I said that he was one of our longtime listeners but hasn't been writing in. So he
He wrote in to complain
wrote
about
in
it.
to complain about it.
Nice.
So if you would like me to say that you don't write in enough, let me know that you exist by emailing us at unprofessionalengineering@gmail.com.
And James will send you some stickers.
I will send you some
I
stickers.
do none of that, so James does all of it. So
I-
overwhelm him with mailing.
That's right, do it. And then go on to iTunes or wherever you listen.
Subscribe.
That's right, just press the subscribe
Yeah.
button. I actually went through the process last night. It's the first time I've ever subscribed to a podcast.
Okay.
And then write us a review. We're up to like 65 of
Whoa.
them, which is pretty good.
That's really good.
I think we're getting somewhere, Luke.
Nice. I think we are too.
All right, so let's move on to 1824. Do you know anything about that year?
No, it's the
Two-
Columbus sailed the ocean blue.
I think it was around then.
Okay.
It kind of does have to do with water, though. Congress passed two important laws. The General Survey Act, which authorized the president to have surveys made of routes of roads and canals of national importance in a commercial or military point of view. And of course, he said, Army Corps, you're in charge of that. And then the second act, passed a month later, appropriated 75,000 big ones to improve navigation of the Ohio and the Mississippi rivers by removing sandbars, snags, and other obstacles. And this basically created what the Mississippi is today, like all of the steamboat traffic and the trade, making New Orleans like explode in size.
And to
things
this
like that.
day, dredging and maintaining some of our like vital waterways is actually still a big part of what they do. They make sure that they are navigable. Isn't that
That's the word, Luke. You nailed it.
nice? Navigable.
I'm so proud of you.
I know. I'm so good at the spells.
All right, so my next piece of history is World War I. Do you have anything before that?
I don't. I did the New Deal. Is
The
what I
New
got.
Deal.
The New Deal. I think yours is probably a little bit before that.
Okay, we're going to do World War I. So the British and French governments made the arrival of the American engineers as they showed up over there their top priority to join the, quote, Great War in April of 1917, apparently. So by the end of August, 9 newly organized engineer railway regiments were created, recruited largely from workers on the nation's private railroads, so they got shipped over.
So these are civilians.
Together with the engineer regiment of the 1st Division, they had crossed the Atlantic and arrived in France. The combat engineers constructed, back to G.I. Joe, bridges, roads, narrow gauge railways.
Yeah, the narrow gauge railways. I guess they did that because they could create them much faster than
Right.
traditional width railroads, and they had like little special cars. And when I say narrow gauge, I mean like it's big enough to transport people and materials, but it's like half the size of a regular railway.
Right.
Thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. The 20th Engineers produced roughly 200 million feet of lumber in France. Other engineering troops helped out with port facilities, constructed more than 20 million square feet of storage space, and built 800 miles of standard gauge rail line as well. So it's clear to say that engineers basically single-handedly won World War I as well.
I agree.
World War II?
Shoot.
During World War II, They created and placed floating and later fixed bridges along the rivers of Italy, France, and Germany. On the beaches of Normandy, which we all know about,
Yep.
engineers troops operated under heavy fire because they're not scared of no enemies. They cleared lanes by creating landing crafts and destroying mine-bearing steel structures that the Germans had implanted, and bulldozed roads and things like that, clearing lines. During the Battle of the Bulge, quick engineer action destroyed critical bridges in the path of advancing German forces, slowing them and diverting them so we could have time to regroup. Again,
I love the these guys. So
engineers won World War II.
Yeah, and it's interesting
welcome.
because like if you think of almost every major like event, world wars, the building of, infrastructure here in the United States, supporting international infrastructure.
Yeah.
I mean, these cats have their hands in everything.
Yeah.
And it's and sometimes it's warfare.
Sometimes it is.
I think a lot of cases warfare, but in other cases it's they're maintaining waterways so that commercial vehicles can get back and forth. Or they're maintaining, highways or different, areas. So like they're camping. Like I did not know that I forget the number, but a lot of the recreational facilities like dams and locks that have like campsites and campgrounds located near them, it's the Army Corps of Engineers that typically build and maintain those.
That's outstanding.
Yeah. Everything.
Everything I picked out to talk about was pretty much military because people can relate to it or understand it or know about it in history and don't know maybe what the Corps did to participate in that. But if you go to usace.army.mil, you can check out their history stuff. And it's, like you're saying, everything, like roadways and waterways and dams and locks
and they basically
everything.
Built America.
They do, they just do so much that you would have no idea they're involved in. And like you're saying, now they're just fingers in all the pies.
I was telling you this the other day whenever we were talking about doing this show. Right near my home, so I live here in western Pennsylvania, and there's this little creek down about 5 minutes away from my house, and as I'm walking along it, there's this sign that says Project XYZ whatever built by the Army Corps of Engineers, and basically what they've done was, I'm assuming it's probably to prevent the creek from overflowing or controlling the flow of it so that, there's no flooding, because a lot of the stuff they do has to do with flood and water management and that sort of thing. And it's just, there's these giant embankments that they've obviously built and created and maintained. So, and you see those signs, now that I'm thinking about it, everywhere you go, you see these Army Corps of Engineer project signs, which is kind of interesting.
I feel like they were all probably Eagle Scouts, don't you think?
I would guess.
Yeah.
Right?
So what other history did you have to say? The New Deal, did you say?
Yeah, so during the New Deal, the Corps participated in 3 major hydropower projects. They did the... I'm going to pull it, James.
Yes.
The Pasquamati tidal power project in Maine, Bonneville Dam. I think we talked about that in Columbia
Dam
River.
Episode.
And the Fort Peck Dam on the Missouri River. So these were producing, at the time, 27% of the total U.S. hydropower and 4% of all electrical output in the United States at that time in 1975 was being produced by facilities that the Army Corps of Engineers worked on.
That's very impressive.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Do you have any other history you want to touch on?
There's
some stuff getting closer to nowadays that I'll talk about later on, but...
Okay. Yeah,
all right.
yeah. If you wanna...
So the next thing I want to talk about is the top projects that the Corps has worked on.
Yep.
But before we do that, let's take a break for this week's Luke's Rant.
Okay, so this rant, and I'm not going to say the word regret, or regret.
No regrets.
It's no regrets. But I always thought I wanted to join.
So it's not a rant.
It's not a rant. It's more of a regret, and it's not really a regret. It's more of a
pseudo regret.
Yeah, pseudo regret. Because obviously I love my life and my wife and my family and everything that I have, and you, of course.
Thank you.
But I always wanted, or always thought, my father was in the military, my brother was in the military, and I always thought, yeah, I would love to join the Army. But I had no clue back then that like the Army Corps of Engineers existed, even for the most part, back whenever I was some stupid high schooler, right? And I think it would, had I known that they had that and they do all the different things they do, I think I could have seen me joining the Army and being a part of the Army Corps of Engineers, because the stuff they do is amazing, and so it's not a regret, because like I said, I like what I do now. I get to spend Wednesdays with you, which is
pretty great.
amazing. But I would, so what I'm going to do, James, is I'm going to encourage young engineers out there, whether you're in high school or college, or you're thinking about getting into the engineering field. These guys do some amazing stuff. Check it out. Make sure you check out their website. And I'm going to talk about the jobs you can do, which are amazing, here in a minute. But yeah, so it's more of like, I don't know, rant.
I like that. I think that was great.
And these guys do amazing work.
They do amazing work.
You know, all of
Good for them.
our armed forces in general do great work.
Absolutely.
But these cats, it hits home for you and I, because we're engineers.
That's right. I'll give you a little rant, though.
Shoot.
The word core.
It has an
it's
S
corpse.
on the end of
It's
it.
corpse.
Why do they have
What
an
are you
S on the
doing?
end of it?
It's so stupid.
The American language is the
right?
worst sometimes.
Army Corps of Engineers.
The Army Corps.
All right. So let's talk about some of the projects that they've done over
Yep.
the time. I know you've mentioned some, but they basically, and we talked about it, they made the Mississippi what it is today, which is pretty amazing. They surveyed the national road, like you mentioned, until funding got taken away in 1838. In the early 1800s, America was expanding westward, right? So thousands of families were leaving to find opportunities on the West Coast, but the journey was long and it was dangerous. You know, you get dysentery, you break an axle, you know, a lot of bad stuff was going on. So they made this thing to make the journey safer for all of us to expand and go out there. They built a 130-mile road, which was the national road. So that's pretty cool. They've also built the 555-foot, 5 1/3-inch Washington Monument, which was completed under... Who was it? Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Lincoln Casey, which is weird. Lincoln in the name of the person making the Washington Monument.
Yeah, a little bit.
Fun fact, there's a piece on the top of the monument that's made out of aluminum, which was one of the most valuable metals in the world at this time. And now we make like Coke cans out of it.
That's
So
pretty cool.
That's something, right? The Panama Canal. And I have a little bit of trouble with this one.
I read on the Army Corps of Engineers history page, people think the Army Corps of Engineers built it, but they actually didn't.
It was completed under the supervision
Yeah.
of Army engineer officers. But if you check out our Panama Canal episode, you will find out all sorts of good information about that. So we won't get into that one. Flood Control Act of 1936 made it easier for us to control floods. You mentioned the Bonneville Dam, completed in 1937 as part of the New Deal. So that's pretty great. And we mentioned that in our dams episode. Let's see here. Oh, in 41, they took on the maintenance and construction of Army facilities. And in 1941, there were too many War Department folks in D.C. So they were like, you know what would be a great idea? Let's have our own building. And that's when they went and made the Pentagon, which is pretty cool, because that's a pretty iconic thing.
I also heard that they did where they launched the rockets from.
Missile silos?
No, down space shuttles. They did.
They did do that,
They built
yes.
Johnson. Is that Johnson Space Center?
Kennedy
Space
Space Center, yep. So 4,000 people worked around the clock for 1.5 years to make the Pentagon happen. They were also involved in the Manhattan Project. You know the Manhattan Project?
There's a movie where they made a bomb or something?
The bombs.
Right?
They made the movie about the Manhattan Project. So it wasn't just responsible for overseeing the project, but their organizational structure hid the existence of it. They kind of back-end purchased the uranium ore and conducted experiments. And they also helped with the research sites of Oak Ridge, Hanford, and Los Alamos. You mentioned Kennedy Space Center in 61. They also built, and I've never even heard of this, have you? The King Khalid Military City?
Yeah, so that's the big one in Saudi Arabia. I think it was one of our largest overseas, right?
It's the largest project in the history of the Corps.
Yeah.
Or the Corps, depending.
The Corps, yeah.
Yes. $8.5 billion. It holds 70,000 personnel, including houses and apartments and training, a mosque, a market area, all sorts of stuff. They were supposed to build a cross-Florida barge canal, but then that just never finished, I guess. Restoration of stuff. St. Lawrence Seaway, the intricate channel of like rivers and stuff connecting the Great Lakes, making trade possible, so that's pretty amazing. And just because it was the Cold War and all those pesky Soviets, they helped build the intercontinental ballistic missile silos that were all over the place. 1,200 of them across America. So that's all the stuff that they've done that I wanted to talk about.
So I
have a couple other things that I wanted to say too, but go ahead.
I don't have any like specific things, but I always like to keep things like related to Pittsburgh because that's our
that's
hometown.
how we roll,
Whoop,
yeah.
whoop. So in Pittsburgh alone, they have just our area. So if you go to their website and you look at locations, they have all these different districts. So just in Pittsburgh alone, they have over 20 different key projects.
24. Wow.
They're all related to, in most cases, some type of lock and dam system or waterway, or obviously we're the river city, right?
We are we?
I think we are.
Okay.
So
a river city.
So they maintain and do a lot of projects and research and all kinds of stuff like that. I was talking about Little Chartiers Creek. That's the one behind my house, I'm pretty sure, is the same one.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then another interesting thing is Puerto Rico. They have the district in Pittsburgh was deployed to Puerto Rico. This was not that long ago. This was back in a couple months ago, and they're over in Puerto Rico helping with restoration after Hurricane Sandy and making sure that they have all their power and different things like that. So it seems like it's not just construction and building stuff, but they do a lot of humanitarian aid whenever there's natural disasters, in particular hurricanes and stuff like that. So a little shout out to the Pittsburgh.
The locals.
The locals.
I love it. So we've done a lot of, this is all the great stuff the Army Corps has done, which they do amazing things, and we appreciate it.
Yep.
But it turns out some people say they don't always do good work.
Really?
And the one that we have to point to is unfortunate events of Hurricane Katrina.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there was a lot of, like, politics going on, and there was a lot of finger pointing and who was to blame. And it turns out now they feel a lot of the blame does fall on the Corps for the failure of the levees and then the resulting flooding, which it's been, I think, 15 years.
That seems like
it still is not anywhere near recovered down there.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm not going to defend one way or another, but I think that whenever you're building, so however long ago these seawalls were built, or whatever the heck they're called.
I like seawalls.
I'm not sure what they're called.
Levees?
Levees. What I mean, you can only imagine like what the greatest potential of something. I mean, you can only engineer something to what your expected worst case scenario is going to be. And whenever these things were built 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, because these are pretty old devices and that have been in place, I would guess.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think they were. I don't think they were that old.
Okay.
But I think the big problem is that they were supposed to be rated for higher levels, and then they failed before they were supposed to.
So they should have held based off of what the design
This is my
spec.
understanding. I'd really like to do a whole episode on this. I think it would be very interesting.
I think that could be interesting too.
But a good thing about it, not a good thing, but a result of it is that since then, they've built a $14 billion hurricane system around New Orleans. So hopefully that means something like this wouldn't happen again.
Yeah,
and again, like you were saying, you can only do what you can do.
Yeah. I mean, you get a design. I mean, all engineers know how it works. You get a specification to build something. Here's like what we expect as a max.
Right.
Build so that it can hold to the max, and you hope they did that. I don't know.
So there are a couple other examples.
Can we talk about some sweet jobs?
Dude, I want to hear about all the jobs.
Okay, so I got one in particular that is amazing.
That you just applied for.
Yeah, I did just apply for. I'm fairly certain I'm too old. So this is if you are an enlisted or an officer in the military. So you have to actually join.
Oh, so you're out.
Yeah, so you got to go to boot camp and do push-ups and run and all that sort of stuff. So if you're an officer, you can actually go to be an engineering officer, or you can go be environmental science and engineering officer. And if you look at these job descriptions, these are like amazing like engineering opportunities. So again, check out the Army Corps of engineers, young folks. Now enlisted, so if you're not an officer but yet you're in the military, combat engineer. You just say you're a combat engineer. How cool is that?
Sounds dangerous.
I'm fairly certain. I don't know if our coworker Rob was. I know he was in the military. I think he was a combat engineer. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if he was in the Army Corps of Engineers. I'd have to ask him, but I know he did some engineering and design work while he was in.
Is that right?
Yeah.
You'll have to ask him.
Yeah, I'll have to ask him. Geospatial engineer. construction engineer. So this is the one I love. Special Forces Engineer Sergeant. So here's I did the job description for this one.
I'm excited.
So Special Forces Engineer Sergeant is a construction and demolition specialist. As a builder, the engineering sergeant can create bridges, buildings, and field fortifications. As a demolition specialist, the engineer sergeant can carry out demolition raids against enemy targets such as bridges, railroads, fuel depots, and critical components of infrastructure.
I'm just envisioning a guy like full camouflage on, jumping out of an airplane with like those big like packs of dynamite in each hand,
C4.
like just throwing them as he's like parachuting down, blowing up structures.
I don't know if I don't know if the guy that wrote in for us, our writer inner,
that's the term.
If he knows anybody that's a Special Forces engineering sergeant, I would love to. That just sounds like so you build stuff for your team and then you blow stuff up for the other team. That just sounds amazing. And then there's a technical engineer, and then there is a watercraft engineer. And this was the only ones I could find on the site. I'm not sure if there's other enlisted jobs you could do, or these are the only ones you could do as an enlisted person or as an officer. And then there's tons of jobs for civilians if you check out the website. But these are the only ones I could find for enlisted personnel. But I want to be a Special Forces engineer sergeant.
I'm really glad you looked at those positions because I didn't. So
looks amazing.
That's awesome. So can I find those on LinkedIn, hypothetically speaking?
Or you can go to the website and see them.
All right, sounds good. I think we covered this pretty well. I feel like I learned a lot, which is never a good sign for our listeners, but a great thing for me. So
makes me wish I would have at least explored the opportunity back in the day.
I don't want to travel that much.
Yeah.
But, otherwise, sounds like a great gig.
Yeah, kids, check it out.
Yeah, kids, check it out. And hopefully you learned something here. Until next time.
See ya.